Right, so we are going to continue on putting in those final details. For me, this is a new day, so we starting with new day brain. So let me just gather my thoughts real quickly. So I'm going to take an F pencil. With fresh eyes, I can see we got still a bit of work to do. So I am going to continue on working from the muzzle down or across. And yeah, we're going to continue building up, same kind of process of adding details. So yeah. Just going to take my F pencil and continue building up these fur layers in the same manner that we've been doing kind of throughout this entire process. I'm quite happy with the way the nose is looking. And I just want for the rest of the fur to kind of get rid of this grainy look that's provided by the paper. So that's just basically meaning that we've still got a few layers to add. If you go in with too heavy hand, you can just use your blending stump to just blend that out. So I'm actually just gonna take the brush with some powder. I generally kind of do this when I just want to add a kind of a tiny step up layer with an even surface from which I can add details. Without having to add too much actual pencil to the paper. So I'm just taking my F pencil again, continuing on with that kind of process. So now I'm just going to take my mono eraser and just bring back some dimension into this area of the muzzle. So I'm starting at the top here where there's a bit of a lighter point. And also just because I can't help myself, I'll go into the nose as well. And as you can see, I can still take away quite a bit of pencil. Some of these whiskers here are actually darker, so you can add them with a pencil. So that's also kind of a later step. I don't have to worry about that. That one can add right at the end. Also, you can go to the side, although it's actually a bit darker. To avoid kind of that harsh line, you just add some more little lighter hairs further into the muzzle, and that will kind of just create more of a realistic feel to it. Now, where's my big pencil? I'm going to take an 8B, give it a good sharpen. I'm going to start with the darkest areas. Oops, there goes the point, but that's fine. Just sharpen it again. I'm gonna go kind of all over the drawing. And it might be like, oh, we can add more layers with something else first, but no, we're kind of at that stage where you can add details with your darkest kind of in the range. And this will also kind of speed up the final detail, adding depth process, so to speak. So I'm gonna go in these areas under here and really bring out depth. And this will just help to finalize the values also within the rest of the drawing. Even though some areas are not actually complete. This will kind of just speed up the decision-making process, basically. Even in areas over here, very close to the actual lip line, just adding a bit of depth. And even we'll go into the actual fur area as well with the 8B. Now, keeping it quite I'm going to be moving around my light just so that I can also see, just due to the reflection. It shouldn't cause you too much problems being able to see what I'm doing. Just in areas like over here, you pull into the lighter bit, and that will just help create that depth underneath, rather than having to kind of work your way around it. It just makes it easier. Even in areas over here, you kind of pull in both directions. And that will just help create that dimension and layer over feeling. So probably after this step, I'll go in with an HB on F pencil, just to get rid of that grainy look from the paper, and also just to pull out the 8B into certain areas to blend it out basically. Because now that I've added the 8B, these areas will have to get significantly darker than it already is. So that's basically the main reasoning why I do these steps. It just helps me to gauge how far off some of my values are and just help with the contrast. So in areas like this, it's mainly not a detail thing. It's very much just a value thing. So even around here. The darkest little bit is only in this corner, so I'm only going to add it there for now. And you can already see the difference it makes just by adding that little bit of depth in an area. How that kind of flat look turns a bit more three-dimensional, even if it's just a slight difference. So never sleep on your darkest values ever, but they're definitely not the things you put in first. Because that might kind of steer you into a wrong direction in the beginning. Because you need to kind of treat your shadows the same way you do your highlights. And that's kind of something you build up towards, not something that's added in first. So I like my drawings to look flat first, and then adding in these dark shadows and everything helps me to instantly see where I am with my drawing, and kind of helps me gauge how far I still need to go. So it's very much like a progress bar for me. And it shows instantly just adding in depth in a certain area, like adding in the depth here where it's still not dark enough. So these little highlights here, everything, even this gray hair, is technically not white. If you're going to draw this in color, it's not white at all. It's more like a bluish gray, which is technically a highlight to me. This is what I would describe as a highlight in the shadow, a light bit in the shadow. So it's not going to stay white like this, because it doesn't have the same highlight properties as the fur here and here and here. It's very much similar to me as to what it looks down here in value, and even these little hairs over here. So it helps with those kinds of decision making process to know whether or not this highlight to me looks out of place the way it looks now, because it's too light. It needs to be darker and be a highlight for the darker values and not compete with the lightest highlights of the rest of the face. So yeah, I hope that makes sense, but that's just basically the way I see it and how pictures kind of start to fall into place. So I'm just going to give this another sharpen. Scoot you in just a tad. So here I think we did 7B or 6B, but that was with the Staedtler and the Cretacolors, which is a bit softer and a bit more grey in tone. I think the 7B was the Faber-Castell. I don't know, I just pick up pencils. So in areas like this where it's not a defined line of shadow, you need to be a little bit more careful and precise with your applications, just so that it makes sense with whatever is going on underneath, and absolutely use a blending stump to kind of just help pull it out, and then you can continue on with the rest of the drawing. So it's very much a slow process, these stop layers, and I kind of want to implore you not to rush through them, because that's kind of where you miss certain elements, or you might go a little too heavy-handed. And this whole like exercise is to build up that values not slowly but correctly and in the right places. So you have to know where you're going to put them down, where it's going to aid in determining the values for the rest of the drawing. So it's very much a not supposed to be rushed at all. So also these values will, if you start adding in your highlights, it will give it a more of a punch. Will make it stand out even more. So that's also kind of the reason you start putting in these, is to know where your highlights are totally misplaced or too large. And whether or not they are not the main highlights that needs to be focused on. So I'm not going to go down here just yet. These are kind of final areas for detail. And here you can see I'm employing more of a circular motion because it's starting to near the kind of edge of my portrait area. So I'm just going to take a blending stump, a dirty one preferably, because these HBs do make a mess of a blending stump. So you need something with already something on it to kind of help blend it out. And here I'm blending into the lighter areas as well. I'm still going to take an HB pencil to blend out, but this is kind of just an initial step to move the pencil around more across a wider area. There we go. So I'm just going to give my little HB a sharpen. And then I'm going to continue on going around the drawing. Just going to move you over just a scooch. If you did make like little indications of whiskers, just work around them as you've now kind of already placed them on the drawing. And here we just kind of, it's also one of the areas that I've kind of neglected, but just slowly kind of start paying some more attention to these areas, especially if you might, like me, kind of skipped over them. And then I'm just going to take my blending stump again and kind of move that HB around. Now I'm going to take my HB, still sharp. You can actually generally start anywhere in the drawing that you'd like, but I tend to, even though I'm right-handed, I tend to work right to left. I don't ask me why. And you're just going to go over those areas, blend out the HB pencil, kind of get rid of that grainy look if you've got a paper with a grain like me, and just work your way through the drawing. And I'm just going to keep a little blending stump at hand. And also a mono eraser. Just so that you kind of do this all in one, rather than go through the whole thing. You can obviously go through per like tool, but just it's nice to sometimes do them together, especially in these later stages, just to kind of go through an area specifically and kind of work on that. So I will probably start adding other pencils as well, but for now it's just the HB. And here those little grey hairs are more individual, very visible individual hairs, so kind of start indicating that as such. And here I'm just going to also, my 8B is going to be one of those pencils I keep in hand, especially for these dark areas. So I'm just going to also give a sharpen, a little bit more precise. And this will also help to kind of show that there's individual hairs in these areas. HB pencil again. I'm gonna actually take a blending stump and then just blend this area out. There we go. HB pencil. A to B. You're going to also kind of short little strokes into the lip, just so that you don't have a straight line. Mono eraser. You're going to want to have a little bit more pressure just to get payoff, because you're now using the 8B, which doesn't exactly budge when you've added it to the paper. There we go. Just going to take like a few steps down with a 4B. Just to kind of more, it won't have such a grainy effect on the paper. And just to start filling in all those areas around. Obviously this is not the final look, but it's getting there. Just 2H pencil just to blend out here in this like lip line area. I'm gonna go over all of that. Also here, if you like me, have like a line of highlights. I'm just gonna take stiff bristle brush, nothing on it, just in circular motions, just going to even out those values. Mono eraser, give it a good sharpen and a clean. And then just going to start adding some of that texture in this little lip area, which we haven't actually been paying much attention to, but that's just me, really. The way I roll, I guess, unfortunately. HB pencil. I'm just going to clean up also my shapes as well with the HB, because they can sometimes get muddled and maybe a little too big or not correct, especially with all the powder and the blending. You just want to just correct as we go along. Mono eraser just to kind of add in this little line of fur. It's kind of gotten lost. Also just going to take HB, and that will also just help establish these lines. When you are applying more pressure to your mono eraser, you will probably take away a large chunk than you would need, but just take your 8B or your HB or whatever pencil you want to use and just kind of clean up those kind of eraser marks that you did make. That will kind of even them out again. Just gonna take my HB and just mix, and then also just a fluffy brush, and you're gonna go over that whole area just to take away some of that harshness from the mono eraser. Okay, I'm getting somewhere. So this is my 8B again. And I'm just going to take my F pencil . And then E, something a bit more. And you're just going to add lines into these areas. You don't want a pencil that's too dark, that's going to kind of make it look very harsh. You want something that just barely peeks through the layers that you've already added. And you can use a bit harder pressure as well, just to kind of have that effect. So this is just a mono eraser that I'm taking and just kind of cleaning up in areas. Then you can just take a brush and just mute it out again. This is a 4B. And you can also use it in areas such as this. Any areas where you want a solid like shadow, keep it to the smallest possible area before you start showing indications of even slight texture, because you kind of do sometimes need that solid shadow, but it mustn't be predominant, the main area of your shadows. It must just be something from which your textures in the shadows come from, because sometimes it does aid in just kind of anchoring your darkest spots. So that's just what I did here. Underneath the link, and then from there you can pull out into your textures. Taking my F pencil, just adding slightly but more depth to kind of the edge of that little fur swoop. Also just taking it here to blend out where I use that 4B. And it doesn't matter if it's also kind of a solid application, because you will easily be able to build on top of that. This is just to even out that application. Take your blending stump. You can use circular motions for this. It will be the best way to blend out that type of application. So you can see now, I'm going to scoot it out, smudge, that with the addition of kind of the depth here, it's looking kind of flat just in this space, and the ear needs to be darker along with this section, just to kind of balance off the portrait basically. But we're getting there, slowly but surely. Slowly but surely. This is my F pencil. I'm going to scoot you back in. And I'm just going to continue kind of using that same method across the whole portrait. I meant actually to be using a 4B, not an F pencil. So just I'm actually, for this part, going to take a B pencil scoot myself closer. And just so that, don't take the 4B because it will probably be a bit too harsh. Just build up this area ever so slightly. And here it's still not as lot of layers, so we still need to build up kind of that foundation. And then I'm also going to take 2H and just kind of connect in the lighter areas where I didn't go with the B pencil, just to fill in the gaps. And also just taking it into kind of this darker little area as well. And I'm also just taking this into the rest of the drawing as well. And this will kind of just in all these areas just also fill in the gaps and take away some of that grainy look and just slightly deepen up these more lighter areas. And this is also very good in these lighter areas to bring in texture without adding too much depth. It's just barely visible on the layers that we've already put in. And here I'm just kind of, you'll see that it's quite fluffy out here at this eye ridge. And I'm just taking the 2H and kind of breaking up that solid line. This is also one of those areas where I kind of skipped over. So we just, and this kind of way of doing things is very indicative of how I do my final detail layers. It's kind of very all over the place. I don't stick to one area and complete it. I kind of move around the drawing just to keep interest with all these detail layers, because it takes a bit more time. And then I'm just going to take a large fluffy brush, the largest one I've got, and add some powder. And I'm going to go over the whole kind of face area. Not the eye. I'm going to go over the ear as well. The nose, the collar, everywhere. Also going to add another second round of that. There we go. I'm just going to quickly just clean up my perimeter. Right, so now I'm gonna go ear again all the way through. There's my 8B. Just giving my 8B a sharpen. Just gonna scooch you in. So now I'm just going to take my 8B and we are going to 8B, I'm going to keep some other pencils and my mono erasers close, and we're just going to basically do that detail out building values step up again, this time just with even darker, more contrasting values. So I'm going to start like I always do in my darkest area. And keep, where's my B pencil? Maybe the 2B. I'm gonna grab quickly a 2B and sharpen it up. Just for those smaller details that I can put in first. And I'm going to go back with my 8B just in the smallest section of shadow. So what I'm focusing on is that little shadow in between the fur. And then I'm going to take my 2B and use that to pull out the 8B kind of pencil mark that I made. Take my 8B again, just for these little shadows here. And this is generally small little dark marks that you're making. Mono eraser. Just making those. It's kind of like a little dot and then everything just twirls away from it. 2B, just like to clean it up. Then 8B again for this section. If I explain less in these like detail sections, well, partly it's because I'm concentrating, but the method of adding these details are not dissimilar to the previous layers of work that we did. You are merely using a different combination of pencils to create them. So I just want to kind of to keep in mind that that's the whole reason I do kind of the way I do things, is the method stays the same. Nothing about the method changes. It's just a combination of the pencils that you use that will generally change. It's my 2B. And as the layers continue on, the areas you work in become smaller and you become more precise with your application. Sorry, it's just my phone notifications. So that's kind of the lovely thing about fur, is obviously it will change depending on whether it's curly or long or thick or short or flat, or it has markings or not, but the basic principle remains the same, and it's a very much copy and paste type of thing. So, which makes it easy, because it will at some point become a point, will come a point where you can kind of autopilot it. And there's not much thinking involved. This is my 8B pencil again. I'm keeping it to the sharper point to avoid that kind of grainy application because of the paper. So I'm just going to go back, take my 2B, and just continue on. I might be feeling that 2B is a bit too light, so I might, let's see, yeah. I'm going to take the Cretacolor 2B and see if it's going to give me a little bit more payoff. Oh, that's a bit better. Just going to take a brush, no powder, just in this bottom part of the ear. Go. So I'm using quite a high pressure with this 2B application. Go back with my 8B. And not necessarily in kind of a similar pattern, but a bit more sporadic. I'm just going to take my 2H for this lighter section. One eraser. And this is just more of a, not like a complete line that you're trying to pull as with these type of fluffy fur. It's just more of a shorter little peppery look to it. Go. Go. So as you can see, I kind of, for the lightest little kind of sun highlight, just kept, you can add the line, but that's just a little bit too harsh, so I just kind of use it as fur to kind of create that highlight, and then I'm just going to take a brush and just sweep over to kind of diffuse it or just blended it in a little bit. Continuing in with my mono eraser. Go. Then I'm just going to take my 2B and kind of make these highlights smaller. Also just add some back in. And give these little fur a little highlighted kind of tip. This is just my 2B pencil. It's actually B, the smaller one is the B pencil. Take B. Just adding in more depths, certain points. There we go. It's gonna look a bit odd in the beginning, so you kind of just have to trust the process. 2B pencil and just blend out kind of that application. There we go. 2H. And just kind of long, continuous strokes. 8B again. Yeah, I'm not going to use the same pressure as I did up here. Keep it a bit softer. And just to be pencil. Okay. 4B pencil. Just in this section here. So with this application of deepening up the values, you still want to keep in mind the contour of the area you're working on, and not just deepen up the entire area in a similar fashion. So you still have to keep in mind the contours underneath these areas, and not just, you know, go ham all over the show and deepen up the area as you kind of think it should look, and still kind of play to the rules of your bottom layers and the contours of that area. And the details can kind of screw up those proportions if you don't take care of kind of keeping, you know, it to what you've already created and the reference. And this is all about also adding kind of your smaller areas of depth and shadows and those small little contour changes that kind of is not important to those bottom layers because it's such a small section. So that's also what you have to keep in mind in these top detail layers. It's those small little changes in contours that is really negligible in the larger picture when you're putting in those base values. So as you can see, the lighting is terrible, but it's already gotten more depth to it and it's more detailed out and established in comparison to the rest of the drawing. I'm also going to take a 6B. And you just continue building up. If I move along and you still feel that you can play around more with your values, yeah, then absolutely do so. Because I want you to take kind of the reins and decide when you are done with a section, and or whether you are now ready to move along, because obviously you can draw at a different pace than me. So yeah, absolutely. And if you maybe want to start on a different section employing these techniques because it will stay the same, then absolutely go for it. See if you can kind of come to that decision yourself on what kind of steps you need and kind of the type of pencil combinations you need to build up that depth in that area specifically. And I'm just going to take a brush again and just sweep over. And that was just a quick sweep, it wasn't really. So I'm quite pleased with how that's looking. Sorry, I'm moving you around a lot. That's definitely more kind of those last looks and feel to an area that I like and prefer. And I will probably continue kind of adjusting as I go along. Right, so now I'm going to kind of employ those techniques to the face. I'm going to take my 8B pencil. And starting here at my darkest area. Just taking my mono eraser, and you will see there's like these little tufts of fur that kind of lay over the top of those darker sections. So I'm just gonna put them in ever so slightly, just at the top here, and then we'll clean it up as we go. back in with my 8B. Very light pressure. Don't want to add such a harsh shadow or line. Here in this kind of eyebrow section, applying a bit more pressure. So as you can see, I'm adding a lot more depth than what was there before. So that's basically just the initial, and then we're going to go over with other pencils and mono eraser to kind of blend that out and bring dimension back again. And this wasn't as far along as the ear layers. So I'm gonna take an F pencil, give it a sharpen. And you're going to just start working in those areas where the 8B was applied, and also kind of around it as well. And similar to the ear, I'm taking note of more slight differences in changes in values, depending on those slight little contours. I'm just going to quickly take my blending brush and kind of just deepen up that kind of divide between these two areas, and also just pull out certain sections. And I'm just going to take whatever brush is around. Mono eraser. And then I'm just going to take a quick little fluffy brush and just kind of tone that down to the pencil. And you're kind of just gonna rinse and repeat those steps basically, building up the depth as you go. B pencil. Just also gonna take this 8B and kind of very short little strokes, kind of add a little bit of that little lash texture or reflection in the eye, since I am in kind of this general area. Just taking my blending stump, looking for something basic. This one. And just kind of connect those areas to remove that, you see this kind of line of difference, just to minimize that and just to bring back kind of a sameness. And then we'll just go back in with a mono eraser and bring back a bit more. more dimension again. Sorry everyone, I seem to have for the last 10 minutes be talking to myself. So basically what I did was I took a mono eraser and just added some highlights to this section of the fur. So what I was basically explaining was this fur that sits on top of this side of the face, it sticks up a little bit away from the skin. So we want to create a foundational correct value and depth in order for that fur to lay on top of and also have something underneath it. And then I basically just explained that I want to create a deeper value. So I'm creating a little bit of a deeper value than what's currently in the reference. And that lightness you see is basically just the fur, the top layer of the fur. And I want to emulate that by creating the depth first of what's underneath, because you will see, just as in the ear, there's little darker shadows peeking through. And then I will continuously kind of build up those values, rinse and repeat, pencil, eraser, bit of a brush over with powder or no powder, and just continuously kind of build that up. Because it's very similar to the ear, but the ear's fur is kind of facing in a different direction. And even our top here, it's longer than the fur's hair, but it also sticks up out to a point. And I was also kind of talking about pencil selection, how there's a reason that I use, so this is a B pencil that I'm currently just going over and adding, kind of going through those steps of building the depth and detection, then I'll go over the top with a mono eraser. But I was basically just explaining the reason why I have a full range of pencils and not just a few pencils scattered here and there within the range, with gaps in between. So having every set is a small little step up in value. Every pencil is just a small little step up in depth once you go up the range, or a small step down if you go down the range. But this is more important, what I'm now speaking on with your B range pencils. Creating those slight little differences in values becomes a lot easier if you've got the full set. Now, you obviously do not need the full set, but for me, it's just a lot easier. For instance, in this area, I just slightly added the B pencil. We use 4B, 6B, 8B in this area with powder. Now, by just adding the B pencil, I'm not actually adding that much depth or visible textural differences. I'm just creating slight variation in value, a slight difference, a slight little hint of something in certain areas. In some areas it'd be look like I'm doing nothing, but then as I pull out from one area to another, a slight difference will be made. And that's kind of how you get that very subtle detail differences in values and areas that create just a slight shift in value and depth, and kind of just adds more of a realism touch. So I was also explaining with the Staedtlers that I actually really like. It's very similar to the Cretacolors, that I bought kind of pencils that I use regularly in the range, and there's a few gaps in between. But now, since I quite like the pencils, I'm going to fill the gaps in and create a full set. So absolutely, if you don't need to obviously buy it all at once, especially if you don't know if you like the pencils or not. So I just bought like a testing range of pencils that I use quite often and that I know if they work, you fill in the gaps, then it will work obviously. You just have you kind of have your lowest end, your lightest H and your darkest B that the range offers, and then you just kind of 2 or 3 pencils every time. You just skip 2 or 3 and then you buy. So I'm definitely gonna complete the set, but the pencils itself helps a lot just to create those slight value differences, especially if you use the pencils on top of each other to blend the previous layer out. Obviously powder with a soft fluffy brush will do the same, but it's harder to be precise and add textural differences. So this is more important if you want to add a textural difference that has a slight difference in value, if that makes sense. So yeah, you can absolutely complete any portrait with a smaller range. You just need to then know which pencils you use often and is essential to you being able to create all your values. So just by not having the full set, you just have to be a bit more creative with creating those in-between values in your range. With the pencils that you have, and obviously the supplementary tools such as powder and your erasers and your blending stumps, and obviously relying a bit more on the pressure and the application of your pencils. So I just put in a new refill. So I've got, I have to say there's nothing in the art world as nice as a clean eraser. It's so nice. So I'm just going to go in, add the fur details, give it a blend, and then we'll continue on. Don't know which pencil I'm going to use, so I'm going to kind of use this time of erasing to figure out what my next kind of step will be, what next pencil would be, help me create the effect I'm going for. Maybe I'll just use a pencil on a certain area for depth, or more just a blend. Or I'm going to choose something to go over the whole area. So it depends. And you don't always know exactly what the next step will be. So these kind of filler layers of the eraser and the powder and the blending, I use as also planning my next step. Kind of also assessing what I'm doing, and maybe what areas need a bit more work, or maybe somewhere I added too much or too little. I also spoke about in those few minutes that I didn't record about how those foundation layers, I'm very much a detail-oriented person, so I kind of tend to not see the bigger picture very well. I'm always focused on the details, the small stuff. And those initial layers, those steps of creating those initial layers very much forces me to only focus on the bigger picture. And these final layers are kind of a reward to myself to, you know, just get completely lost in the details, because I know I did the grunt work, I did the preparation of creating the big picture as it should be. That in these layers I don't need to worry about proportions, I don't need to worry about contours being off. That in these layers it's all about the details and making slight corrections and not major ones. So it very much allows me to completely forget about the bigger picture and just focus on the small details, which I do like. And that's kind of part of the reason why I kind of faff a lot in these later layers. Probably the reason the snow leopard drawing up on my YouTube took 20 hours, because you know, it's a close-up view, so obviously it depends on what you're drawing, but that was a close-up view, so getting through those setup layers didn't take long, because there's not a lot of proportion and contours to work on. If you know where the spots are and the direction and the size, and it's kind of a very, you don't need to follow it to a T type of deal. The spots were more of a guide also around the drawing, just to know where I am in certain regards. But yeah, that one allowed me those close-up kind of drawings, those focus drawings, really allows one to just focus on the details. And that's why I offer, you know, a tier where it's the big picture. Who cares about the big picture? It's all about the small details. And I mean, if you do realism, you do it because you love the details. Let's be honest. We're all a little bit detail orientated. So I just took a brush, no powder, and went over that just to take away the harshness. Now I'm going to take a 2B, give it a quick sharpen, and we're just going to continue on with that building up method. So now I'm going to focus on the darker areas and also making sure this little furrow of the brow makes sense, and also down here, and just kind of add the little subtle value changes in this side of the face. And I'm going to just slightly with light pressure just also go into these areas, just to kind of add a connection and not have it such a harsh line. So there's still a lot of kind of fur highlights that I can add in, but we're still building up. And also just use this time to clean up the edge between the cheek and the ear. Also just going to take my 2B into the ear. So the previous application was a B pencil, and now I'm just going in the 2B, and these kind of additions are very select and precise. So I only add it where, so I take care to look at the reference actually and see where this application of pencil will be most beneficial and a good addition to the portrait. So I don't necessarily add it all over, but just in certain areas. So this is very much you're more picky about your pencil applications. You're more precise. There we go. Now I'm just going to take the brush, add powder, tap off the excess, and just go over that section. I'm not going to go over the ear because it doesn't need it. And just going back in with the mono eraser. Actually, I'm just going to go over this section as well. That little highlight was bothering me, so I just gave it a bit of a deeper value. Right, so we just continue. Now I want to kind of lighten up. So similar with the pencil, you're a bit more precise, a bit more picky where you add. And I'm not necessarily going to use very hard pressure. I'll probably have to clean this up a lot more because there's a lot of pencil, especially B range pencil on this in this area, so it might take a few passes. And in this section I'll probably, in these lighter fur areas where it's a bit more highlighted, I will go in with the lowest H range I've got, which in my case is in 5H. I had a 7H somewhere, but I have no idea where it is. If the lowest you've got is a 2H, then just use a lighter pressure in these sections. And I'm just going to use it to add a little bit of depth, and also it's similar to what you do with your B pencils in these areas. You also need to do that in your highlighted areas. Because just as you've got details in your shadows and highlights in your shadows, you've got also very subtle value differences in your lightest areas, in your highlights. My absolute lightest highlights will always be in the eye or in metal or leather. Other than that, the fur is like a step darker than my most white highlights, which is never always truly white really. They just look white compared to everything else going in the drawing. There was a time where I added, it was actually not, no, it was a few years ago, where I used a gel pencil, not a gel pencil, a gel pen, those Sakura jelly rolls. I use them to add like little white highlights in the eye or in the tear duct or waterline. So you can absolutely do that as well. It just takes a few I don't use it for large areas because it doesn't really work that well. I think there's other white gel pens or white ink pens one can use that might work better, but I no longer use them. It's all just pencil really. I just remembered I also bought those very dark pencils that make black. It's not really one of those drawings where one can use it, but I might use it in my ebook tutorial, the horse, in certain areas, especially in the eye. So mixed media, you can absolutely use mixed media. You don't have to, like me, use just one medium. I just clean this up because I'm now talking about highlights. So I've got highlights on the brain, so I'm just putting in the little eye highlights. Because I can't help myself. And the eye, we're obviously going to do some work on the eye as well, but I generally tend to leave that till last. And I'll add in these highlights again in the final step. There we go. Quite liking how that looks, so I'm just gonna remove some of that harshness back in with my mono eraser. And obviously if you use lighter pressure, you can kind of have varying, not lighter pressure, but if you use varying pressure on your razor, you can create varying like highlights. Some are softer and more in the background, while others are a bit more in your face, stark. And if you look at the reference, you kind of do have that. You have maybe lighter highlights or a clump of something that's a bit more visible. And that also just creates some variation and not just a very sameness to your drawing. That everything is not just the same. I sometimes tend to also see that when people draw fur, it's very same across the board. There's no textural and even value differences within the textures. The light does catch the fur differently depending on the contours of the face. So it's very much, you've got to be paying attention to that and not just creating everything the same across the board. You want those nuanced differences and have some what's the word, some variation. Variation is probably the word I'm looking for, but it's not the one that's on the tip of my tongue that I'm looking for. So yeah. So there's just some, as you can see, there's some lighter, some darker. And when you add pencil, you can also do the same. Maybe add a darker shadow underneath one of the fur little highlights that you made, and maybe, blend another one out more. Play around, you know. Don't just follow the same steps all over. Have a little variation. Brush, nothing on it. 5H. So like I said, if 2H is your lowest H pencil, use it. In areas where it's darker, you can use more pressure. In the lighter areas, just have a slighter, softer application of the pencil. But this one is very light. And this just also helps create those textural elements within your highlights. And I'm just also just going to create... And with the values underneath, this pencil is very similar. And with the highlights, I'm also just pulling it out into fur, and also every now and again just add like a different direction. I should have probably erased my grid lines before doing this, but hey. Yeah, I just do things. You very much can also go with that pencil that you're using and go into this entire section. And that will just also add, it might not be visible, but it will kind of just even everything out. And in areas where you use your eraser, if you I sometimes use it to split an erase mark. And that's just also one way to add, or if it's too big, to just split it up into different little fur bits and create some textural elements into what you've erased. So I'm very much happy with that. Look at how that's looking. So I'm just going to scooch you out, not in. So you'll see the big difference of this compared to this. And that's the top layer of details. Value differences, not a big difference. This is flatter, and obviously this has more intricacy, but this is what we're going for. And this up here in the ear, let me just scoot you a bit away from the light so you can see the actual ear values as well. So this is very much the top detail layers. This is what we're going for. Here you can see some indication of fur. You can very much, if that's your style, keep it the soft and blurred and blend it out. And a very soft, fluffy look. There's artists I follow that has that soft, almost ethereal, blurry, but still detailed look to their portraits, which I'm like, how do you do that? I do not have such a soft hand. You can absolutely continue on with this soft blend and just use what we've done with the foundation layers and just build on that to add and very much get almost like the effect that you have here, just with deeper values. But this is what we're going for, and you can just see what difference it makes. And even far out, this is very much an established realistic fur look. This, it can pass if you keep your entire drawing like this and this. I mean, you've absolutely nailed realism. You've got your contrasts and your highlights. But it obviously depends on what realism you're after, because realism is not just copying a photo. You very much can make it your own style. So yeah, that's just something, but you can see the difference the details makes. And I very much could have continued on and be happy with this details without having to see the bigger picture. But now seeing the bigger picture, I'm like, yeah, we are absolutely on the right track. And you can see the reference it gives. Kind of, it's not, you know, if you touch the Labrador or any short double coated dog's fur, it's giving a soft feel, but you've got those little pointy bits. And even here you've got the softer little swishes and the harsher, shorter, fluffier bits that sticks out. So yeah, that's very much the look we're going for. And I'm very happy and pleased with the way it's looking. So we will continue on with that. And that took half an hour. So I'm just gonna scoot you back in, away from the bigger picture. And I'm gonna move across to the side before moving down. Because this side needs more love and care. Just gonna keep my 5H in hand just a little bit longer. And just add more those stop stray hairs. And then I'll also just take, you can sometimes just take a brush and pull it out. I'm just going to take a mono eraser as well and just go from, maybe I should clean it first. Don't do like me, think a little bit before you do. And just pull from the blank space in. And then just use your putty eraser to clean up. You can absolutely use your putty eraser as well for this. In larger portraits, the putty eraser is perfect for having that soft little blend. There you go. So now we're moving on to this, which has not received as much attention. I'll include kind of this eye area as well and this brow furrow. I focus more on the top little one in the previous section, so I'm just going to take a brush. There we go. Let me just have a look. I'm going to take my 6B. So with my sharp 6B, I'm going to start at my darkest area, which is here. I think let me just maybe I'm now starting to think maybe I put this too low. Okay. I'm just quickly correcting before I start. And that's completely fine. There, I like that better. So back in with my 6B. And I'm just following the same methods as everywhere else. also taking my 6B into these lighter areas. The reason I think I've probably not paid much attention to the front of the face is because the values are not so apparent. The colors here can be quite confusing, and absolutely I can go and make this black and white grayscale to see what the hell is going on there. But I tend to not do that. I use whatever else I've completed to figure out what the values are, and I kind of play around to see what makes sense in a realistic terms. Don't mind me, I'm just... No area is done until the drawing is signed, so I just do this because I can't help myself. Back to where we're actually working. Very light pressure in this section here, as well as on top of the nose. I'm going to take a brush, add a bit of powder, and just go over the area that I worked. Not here, even though I did add pencil there. Now I'm going to take my mono eraser so I'm going to start here at the top and work my way down. I'm going to first put in that which I know is a highlight. Or kind of a lighter value, even if it's not this light. Not mad at that. The way it's looking now. I'm gonna take a brush, nothing on it, just sweep across. take a 2B pencil. And just following same recipe we've been following for the entire drawing. Just gonna take a brush, put some powder on it, tap off the excess. Okay, now I'm gonna take actually I'm gonna take the mono eraser again. See, this section here needs to be a bit darker, but yeah, let me just, this is my 2B. It's kind of almost like a tear that follows the tear duct line. Okay. Take my 8B, give it a sharpen. Start actually here. So I generally start somewhere familiar, close to the area that I'm actually working on. Sometimes just for, you know, it's like dipping your toes into the water. And then I start moving across. Even going into the lighter areas. Don't mind me just going into the eye. Also just very lightly taking the 8B on the perimeter of, I think, the iris. And just slightly kind of ignoring that inner rim where it's the lightest. And in some areas go slightly darker than others. Just to indicate the different little, because the iris is never just one solid value.